The gunshot echoed through the Detroit backyard as Raina threw herself over 8-year-old Micah, her body becoming a human shield against the masked men who'd come for her family. Snow crunched under her knees as she pressed her son against the frozen ground, his terrified whimpers cutting through the night air. "Mommy!" Micah cried, his small hands clutching at her winter coat. But the shot hadn't come from their attackers. It came from behind her, from the man she'd married 3 months ago, the gentle candy apple vendor who sold sweets in the park every day. Except now, Junho stood in the shadows with a smoking gun, blood seeping through his white shirt, his eyes carrying a darkness she'd never seen before. "You won't touch them," he said, his voice deadly calm as the masked men scrambled backward. "You can't save her next time, boss," one of them shouted before disappearing into the night. "Boss?" Raina's world tilted as she stared at her husband, really looked at him, and saw the truth she'd been blind to. The gentle man who gave her son free candy apples wasn't who she thought he was. He was someone far more dangerous. Welcome to Korean Mafia lovers. Before we dive into Raina and Junho's incredible story, comment below where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring you more heart-stopping romance stories like this one. 6 months earlier, Raina Williams had perfected the art of stretching a dollar until it screamed. Working double shifts at Detroit General Hospital as a nursing assistant, she barely made enough to keep their tiny apartment and put food on the table for Micah. But every Friday, without fail, she saved exactly $5 for one small luxury, a candy apple from the vendor in Hart Plaza. The man behind the cart was an enigma wrapped in humility. Tall, with perfectly styled black hair and kind eyes that seemed to hold secrets, he always wore the same simple clothes: dark jeans, a plain sweater, and an apron that had seen better days. His English was flawless, though she detected the faintest accent that made her curious about his story. "The usual, Mrs. Williams?" he asked as she approached with Micah bouncing beside her. "Just Raina," she corrected for the 100th time, smiling despite her exhaustion. "And yes, one candy apple for this growing boy." Junho, that's all the name he'd ever given, handed the glossy red treat to Micah with the same gentle care he showed every customer. But Raina noticed things others didn't, the way his eyes constantly scanned the crowd, how his hands, though gentle, bore small scars across the knuckles, the expensive watch hidden beneath his worn sleeves. "How was your shift?" he asked, counting her change with unnecessary slowness. "Long. Mrs. Patterson in room 314 is recovering from hip surgery, and she's convinced the night nurses are trying to poison her with Jell-O." Raina laughed, accepting the change he offered, which was always more than she deserved. "You're giving me extra again," she protested. "Family discount," Junho said simply, the same response he'd given for months. "We're not family." Something flickered in his expression, hope maybe, or longing. Not yet. The words hung between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. Raina felt heat rise in her cheeks as Micah tugged on her scrubs. "Mum, can we sit by the fountain, please?" They found their usual bench, and Raina watched Junho serve other customers. There was something almost choreographed about his movements, efficient, precise, like he'd been trained for something far more complex than making candy apples. When a group of teenagers got rowdy near his cart, she saw his posture shift subtly, his stance widening in a way that suggested he could handle trouble if it came. "He likes you," Micah announced around a mouthful of candy apple. "What makes you say that?" "He watches you when you're not looking, and he always makes sure we get the best apple." Micah pointed to the cart. "See, he picks through them to find the perfect one for me." Raina's heart did something complicated in her chest. She'd been so focused on survival, on making sure Micah had what he needed, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be noticed by someone. Really noticed. As they prepared to leave, Junho appeared beside their bench with a small paper bag. "For tomorrow," he said, handing it to Micah, "I made extra caramel sauce." "You don't have to," Raina began. "I know." His eyes met hers, and she saw something vulnerable there. "I want to." That night, after Micah fell asleep, clutching the bag of caramel sauce like treasure, Raina found herself thinking about Junho's hands. They were beautiful hands, long fingers, neat nails, but those scars told stories she couldn't read. And the way he'd appeared beside their bench so silently, like he'd been trained to move without sound. She shook her head, dismissing the thoughts. She was reading too much into things. Junho was just a kind man who sold candy apples and happened to be good to her son. The fact that he made her pulse quicken when he smiled was just her body reminding her she was still a woman, not just a mother and a nurse. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Junho than met the eye. The next Friday, it rained. Reina almost didn't go to the plaza, but Micah had been talking about his candy apple all week. She bundled them both in raincoats and made the trek downtown, expecting to find the plaza empty. Instead, Junho was there, his cart covered with a clear tarp, still serving the few brave souls who'd ventured out in the weather. "You didn't have to come out in this," Reina said, shaking raindrops from her coat. "I promised Micah I'd be here," Junho replied, already preparing their usual order. "A promise is a promise." As he handed over the candy apple, their fingers brushed. The contact sent electricity up Reina's arm, and she saw Junho's eyes widen slightly, as if he'd felt it too. "Reina," he said quietly, would you like to have coffee sometime? When you're not working?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't really date," she said honestly. "Micah comes first and I work so much." "Bring him," Junho said immediately. "I'd like to get to know you both better. As friends, if that's what you're comfortable with." Friends. The word should have been safe, reassuring. Instead, it felt like a starting point for something much more complicated. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Coffee sounds nice." Junho's smile transformed his entire face, and Reina realized she'd never seen him look truly happy before. It made her wonder what sadness he carried that ran so deep it had become his default expression. As they walked home through the rain, Micah chattering excitedly about having coffee with the candy apple man, Reina couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something much more significant than a casual coffee date. She was right. Their first coffee date happened on a Sunday afternoon at a small cafe near the hospital. Reina had chosen the location deliberately, familiar territory, easy to escape if things got awkward. But as she watched Junho interact with Micah, her defensive walls began to crack. He'd brought a small magic trick, making a quarter disappear and reappear behind Micah's ear, and her son was completely enchanted. More than that, Junho listened when Micah talked about school, about his favorite video games, about missing his father who'd left when he was 3. "My dad said he'd come back," Micah confided, stirring sugar into his hot chocolate. "But Mom says sometimes people make promises they can't keep." Junho glanced at Reina, his expression gentle. "Your mom is very wise. But you know what? The people who stay are the ones who really matter." "Like you?" Micah asked with the devastating directness of childhood. "I'd like to stay," Junho said quietly, his eyes finding Reina's across the table. "If your mom would let me." The conversation moved to safer topics after that. Junho's love of cooking, Reina's dreams of becoming a registered nurse someday, Micah's ambition to become a superhero. But underneath the casual chat, Reina felt the steady pull of attraction growing stronger. There was something about the way Junho moved, the way he carried himself that suggested hidden depths. When the cafe door chimed and a group of loud customers entered, she saw his body tense almost imperceptibly, his eyes tracking their movements until he was satisfied they posed no threat. "Are you okay?" she asked. Junho blinked, seeming to return from somewhere far away. "Sorry, old habits." "What kind of old habits?" For a moment she thought he might tell her the truth. His mouth opened, then closed, and something shuttered behind his eyes. "I used to work security," he said finally. "You learn to watch people." It wasn't exactly a lie, Reina supposed, but it felt incomplete. Still, everyone had secrets. God knew she had her own. Their coffee dates became a weekly tradition, then twice weekly. Then Junho started appearing at the hospital during her dinner breaks, bringing homemade soup and sandwiches that were far better than anything from the cafeteria. "You don't have to feed me," Reina protested one evening as he unpacked containers of bulgogi and rice. "I like taking care of people," Junho said simply. "And you're always taking care of everyone else. Who takes care of you?" The question hit harder than it should have. Reina had been on her own for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone worry about her well-being. "I take care of myself." "I know you do. You're incredibly strong." Junho's voice was soft, admiring. But even strong people deserve to be cared for. That night, as they shared dinner in the hospital break room, Raina found herself really looking at Junho. The way his hands moved with practiced precision as he served the food, the expensive fabric of his simple clothes, the way other people seemed to give him space without realizing they were doing it. "Junho," she said carefully, "what did you do before the candy apple cart?" His chopsticks paused halfway to his mouth. "Different things, import business mostly." "What kind of imports?" "Various goods, nothing exciting." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Food is more honest work, more peaceful. The way he said peaceful made it sound like something he'd been searching for rather than something he'd always had. 3 weeks later, Junho asked her to marry him. They were in the park after closing time, Micah asleep on a bench between them as they watched the sunset paint the Detroit skyline. It had been a perfect day. Junho had taught Micah to make caramel from scratch, and they'd all gotten sticky and laughed until their sides hurt. "Raina," Junho said quietly, not wanting to wake Micah, "I know this might seem fast, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." She turned to look at him, seeing something vulnerable and desperate in his expression. "I want to take care of you and Micah. I want to be the family you deserve. I know I don't have much to offer, just a candy cart and a small apartment, but I love you, both of you." Raina's heart stopped. "Junho, I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt before, but I'm not going anywhere." He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "I don't have a ring or a fancy proposal or promises of wealth. I just have this." He pressed her hand to his chest, where his heart was racing. "And it's yours, if you want it." Raina looked at this man who'd become so important to her, who made her son laugh and brought her soup when she was tired, and looked at her like she was something precious. She thought about the small inconsistencies in his story, the way he sometimes seemed to be hiding something. But then she looked at his eyes and saw nothing but love and hope and desperate sincerity. "Yes," she whispered. Junho's smile was radiant. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Raina felt like she was finally coming home after a long, difficult journey. They were married 2 weeks later at the courthouse, with Micah as their witness and a handful of courthouse workers as their congregation. Junho wore a simple black suit that probably cost more than Raina made in a month, though she didn't think about that at the time. She wore a white dress from Target and felt like a princess. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Junho kissed her with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For what?" "For saving me." Raina didn't understand what he meant then. She thought he was just being romantic, talking about how love had changed his life. She had no idea how literal he was being. That night, in their small apartment, Junho had moved in with them rather than asking them to leave their home. Raina lay in her new husband's arms and felt completely content for the first time in years. "I love you, Mrs. Park," Junho murmured into her hair. "I love you too, Mr. Park." But even as she drifted off to sleep, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something about this was too good to be true. People didn't just appear in your life and fix everything with candy apples and gentle smiles. She pushed the thought away. Sometimes, she told herself, good things really did happen to good people. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after their wedding. Raina woke to find Junho already dressed, speaking quietly into his phone in what sounded like Korean. When he saw her stirring, he ended the call abruptly. "Work?" she asked, stretching. "Supply issues," he said, but his smile seemed forced. "Nothing serious." But over the following days, the phone calls became more frequent, always in Korean, always ending when she entered the room. Junho started coming home later, claiming the cart needed repairs or that he was exploring new locations. When she offered to help, he deflected with kisses and promises that everything was fine. Then she noticed the bruises. "What happened to your knuckles?" she asked one evening as they prepared dinner together. Junho glanced down at his hands, where fresh scrapes marked his knuckles. "Clumsy with the cart equipment, those metal parts are sharp." Raina had worked in healthcare long enough to recognize defensive wounds when she saw them. Those weren't scrapes from equipment, they were the kind of injuries you got from hitting something, or someone. "Junho, it's nothing, sweetheart." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You worry too much." But Raina's instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Junho had been late coming home, claiming he'd needed to restock supplies. But when Raina hugged him, she smelled something metallic on his clothes, something that reminded her of the emergency room on bad nights. Blood. "I need to shower," Junho said quickly, pulling away. "Long day." As he disappeared into the bathroom, Raina noticed his jacket thrown over the chair. A dark stain on the sleeve caught her attention. She touched it. Still damp, definitely blood, and far too much to be from a simple cut. Her hands shook as she searched the pockets. Not sure what she was looking for, but knowing she needed answers. Her fingers closed around something cold and metal. A gun. Raina stumbled backward, her mind reeling. Why would a candy apple vendor need a gun? What kind of supply issues involved weapons and blood? She was still staring at the weapon when Junho emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist, and froze. "Raina? What is this?" Her voice came out as a whisper. Junho's expression shifted, and for a moment she saw someone else entirely, someone harder, more dangerous. Then the mask slipped back into place. "Protection," he said carefully. "Detroit can be dangerous, especially at night. This isn't some little pistol for protection. This is." She didn't know guns, but she knew this one was serious, military-grade serious. "Raina, please, let me explain." "Explain what? The phone calls in Korean, the bruises, the blood on your clothes?" Her voice was rising, and she forced herself to lower it for Micah's sake. "Who are you?" Junho sat heavily on the bed, his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with something that looked like grief. "I'm exactly who I've been with you," he said quietly. "I'm the man who loves you and Micah more than his own life. Everything else. Everything else is just shadows from a life I'm trying to leave behind." "What shadows?" For a long moment, Junho said nothing. Then, "I used to be involved with some dangerous people. Bad people. I got out. But sometimes the past doesn't let you go as easily as you'd like." "What kind of dangerous people?" "The kind who solve problems with violence." His voice was barely audible. "The kind who would hurt you and Micah to get to me." Raina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Are we in danger?" "No," Junho said immediately, then caught himself. "I don't think so. I've been careful. I've kept that life completely separate from this one. But you're still carrying a gun, just in case." Raina looked at this man she'd married, this man she'd fallen in love with, and realized she didn't know him at all. The gentle candy apple vendor was real. She'd seen his kindness, felt his love, but he was also something else, something darker. "I need time to think," she said finally. Junho nodded, his face pale. "Of course, I'll sleep on the couch tonight." "No." Raina surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "You'll sleep here. This is your home now. But I need honesty, Junho. Complete honesty. No more half-truths or deflections. You might not like what you hear. I definitely won't like it if I find out you've been lying to me." That weekend, while Micah was at a sleepover, Junho told her everything. Not the complete truth. She would learn later just how much he'd held back, but enough to understand the scope of what she'd walked into. He'd been involved with Korean organized crime. Import business, yes, but not the legal kind. He'd tried to get out, but his former associates hadn't been willing to let him go. The candy apple cart wasn't just a new life. It was a hiding place. "I thought I could disappear," he said, his voice raw. "I thought if I became someone completely different, they'd never find me. And for a while, it worked. But they found you. They're getting close, the phone calls, the meetings. I'm trying to negotiate a clean break, something permanent. And if they won't give you one..." Junho's silence was answer enough. Raina processed this information with the same clinical detachment she used at work when dealing with trauma cases. Panic wouldn't help anyone. She needed to think clearly. "What do they want from you?" "Money, information, my return." Junho laughed bitterly. "I was good at what I did, Raina. Too good. They don't want to lose that." "And what did you do?" "Exactly?" Another long pause. "I solved problems permanently." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Raina understood now why Junho moved like a predator, why he watched crowds like a bodyguard, why his hands bore the scars of violence. Her husband was a killer, but as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw the man who made Micah laugh, who brought her soup when she was tired, who cried when they got married. Both versions were real. The question was, which one would win? "I love you," she said finally. "But if you ever lie to me again, if you ever put Micah in danger, I will take my son and disappear. Do you understand?" Junho nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I understand." "Good. Now tell me what we need to do to keep our family safe." It was the first time she'd called them a family since learning the truth. Junho's expression crumpled with relief and gratitude. "We might need to run," he said quietly. "Then we'll run." But even as she said it, Reina knew running wouldn't be enough. The shadows from Junho's past were already reaching for them, and soon they would have to fight. The attack came 3 days later, just as Junho had feared. Reina was closing the blinds after putting Micah to bed when she saw them. 2 men in dark clothes standing across the street, their attention focused on their apartment building. Her blood turned to ice. "Junho," she called softly. He appeared instantly, moving with that predatory grace she now understood. One look out the window and his face went hard. "Pack a bag," he said quietly. "Only essentials. We have maybe 10 minutes. What about Micah?" "I'll get him. Go." Reina's hands shook as she threw clothes into a duffel bag. This was really happening. The life she'd built, the safety she'd fought so hard to create for her son, it was all crumbling because she'd fallen in love with the wrong man. No, not the wrong man. A man with a dangerous past, but not the wrong man. She was zipping the bag when she heard Micah's sleepy voice from the hallway. "Mom, what's happening?" "We're going on a trip, baby," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "Remember how we used to play the quiet game? We need to play that now." Micah, bless him, seemed to understand the seriousness in her tone. He nodded and took her hand as Junho appeared with his own bag and something else, a larger gun than the one she'd found in his jacket. "Back exit," Junho whispered. "My car is in the alley." They made it exactly halfway down the back stairs before the men found them. "Going somewhere, boss?" The voice came from below, and Reina's heart stopped as she saw a figure emerge from the shadows. Asian, well-dressed, with cold eyes that reminded her of winter. "Daehyun," Junho said, and Reina heard years of history in that single word. "I told you I was out. You don't get to be out. Not after what you cost us." The man, Daehyun, smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Reina had ever seen. "But I'm willing to discuss terms. Name them. You come back, resume your old position, and we forget about your little domestic experiment." Junho's grip tightened on his gun. "And if I refuse? Then your wife becomes a widow, and your stepson becomes an orphan. Tonight." Reina felt Micah press closer to her side, and something fierce and protective rose in her chest. These men thought they could threaten her child. They had no idea who they were dealing with. "You have 1 minute to decide," Daehyun continued. "Come with us willingly, or we take you by force and clean up the loose ends." 30 seconds, another voice called from above. They were surrounded. Junho looked at Reina, and she saw desperation and love and terrible resolve in his eyes. He was going to surrender. He was going to sacrifice himself to save them. "No," she said quietly. "Reina." "I said no." She stepped forward, putting herself between Junho and Daehyun. "You want him? You go through me." Daehyun laughed. "Lady, you have no idea what you're dealing with. I'm dealing with a man who thinks he can threaten my family." Reina's voice was steady, though her heart was hammering. "I'm a trauma nurse. I've seen what bullets do to people. I've held dying men while they bled out on gurneys. You think you scare me?" Something flickered in Daehyun's expression. Surprise, maybe even respect. "You've got spine," he admitted. "Too bad it won't save you." That's when Junho moved. The stairwell exploded into violence. Junho's first shot took out the man above them. His second sent Daehyun diving for cover. Reina grabbed Micah and pressed him against the wall, covering him with her body as gunfire erupted around them. "Stay down," Junho shouted, returning fire as more men appeared. Reina had never been in a gunfight before, but her medical training kicked in. She assessed threats, calculated angles, looked for escape routes. When she saw one of Daehyun's men trying to flank them from below, she didn't hesitate. "Behind you," she called to Junho. He spun and fired, dropping the threat. But in that moment of distraction, Daehyun got a clear shot. The bullet caught Junho in the shoulder, spinning him around. He hit the wall hard and slid down, blood spreading across his shirt. "Junho!" Raina started toward him, but he waved her back. "Stay with Micah." Daehyun stepped into the open, gun trained on Junho's head. "Enough games. You're coming with me, or I put the next one in your skull." That's when Raina made a decision that would haunt her dreams for years to come. She picked up Junho's dropped gun. She'd never held a weapon before, but desperation made her steady. Daehyun saw her move and started to turn, but he was too slow. "Don't," she said, the gun pointed at his chest. Daehyun froze, then smiled. "You won't shoot. You're not a killer." "You're right," Raina said. "I'm not a killer. I'm a mother. And you threatened my child." She pulled the trigger. The recoil knocked her backward, and her ears rang from the gunshot. Daehyun looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest with something like surprise, then collapsed. The stairwell fell silent except for the sound of Micah crying and Junho's labored breathing. "Is he dead?" Junho asked weakly. Raina knelt beside Daehyun, checking for a pulse with professional efficiency. "Yes." "Good." Junho struggled to his feet, pressing his hand to his wounded shoulder. "We need to go. There will be others." They made it to Junho's car, a sleek black sedan that was definitely not a candy apple vendor's vehicle, and drove through the night to a safe house outside the city. It was only when they were finally secure that the reality of what had happened hit Raina. She had killed a man. She sat in the bathroom of the safe house, staring at her hands, seeing blood that wasn't there anymore. Junho found her there an hour later, his shoulder bandaged but his eyes alert. "Raina, I killed someone," she whispered. "You saved us." He knelt beside her, wincing at the movement. "You saved our family." "I'm not supposed to kill people. I'm supposed to save them." "You did save someone. You saved Micah. You saved me." Raina looked up at her husband, this man she'd married who was so much more complicated than she'd ever imagined, and saw nothing but love and gratitude in his eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we disappear. Really disappear. New names, new lives, somewhere they'll never find us." "And the candy apple cart?" Junho smiled sadly. "That life is over, but maybe we can build something new. Something real." As dawn broke over their temporary refuge, Raina held her sleeping son and watched her wounded husband plan their escape. She'd married a candy apple vendor and discovered he was a mafia boss. She'd killed a man to protect her family. Her old life was over. But looking at Junho and Micah, she realized she was okay with that. Some things were worth fighting for. Some things were worth killing for. The safe house belonged to one of Junho's few remaining allies, a man named Kyung who'd helped him disappear the first time. Unlike others who'd betrayed them, Kyung had stayed loyal even when it cost him. "Daehyun's death will send shockwaves through the organization," Kyung explained as he tended to Junho's shoulder wound. "But it also creates an opportunity. With him gone, the power structure is unstable. Some will want revenge, others will want to consolidate control. Which gives us time to disappear," Junho said. "Maybe. Or it makes you more valuable than ever." Kyung's expression was grim. "You were Daehyun's equal in skill and strategy. With him dead, you're the most experienced operator left. They'll want you back more than ever." Raina listened to this conversation while helping Micah with his homework at the kitchen table, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for her son. But inside, her mind was racing. How did you disappear from people who had resources, connections, and the willingness to kill? "There is another option," Kyung said quietly. "What option?" Junho asked. "You could take control." The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Raina's pencil stopped moving across Micah's math worksheet. "No," Junho said immediately. "I'm done with that life." "Are you? Because that life isn't done with you." Kyung leaned forward. "Think about it logically. Daehyun is dead. His lieutenants are scrambling for power. The organization is fractured. One word from you, and half of them would fall in line. You could reshape everything." "Into what?" "Something better. Something that doesn't prey on innocent people." Raina found herself considering the impossible idea. Could Junho really transform a criminal organization from within? Could he use his position to protect people instead of hurting them? "It's too dangerous," Junho said, "and I won't risk Raina and Micah." You're already at risk, Kyung pointed out. Running makes you look weak. Taking control makes you untouchable. That night, after Micah was asleep, Raina and Junho sat on the porch of the safe house watching stars appear in the clear sky. His arm was in a sling, but he seemed stronger than he had that morning. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I got you into this mess, and I need to get you out. We got into this together. We'll get out together." Junho turned to look at her, his expression soft in the moonlight. "You killed a man for me today. I killed a man who threatened my son. Same thing, isn't it? Protecting family." Raina considered this. "I suppose it is. I never wanted you to have blood on your hands because of me. I know, but it's there now and I'm okay with it." She surprised herself with how true that was. "I'd do it again if I had to." Junho was quiet for a long moment. "Kyung might be right about taking control. You're considering it. I'm considering what's best for our family. Running means always looking over our shoulders, always wondering if today is the day they find us. And taking control means what? You become a crime boss again. I become someone who can protect the people I love. Someone who can make sure organizations like this one don't hurt innocent families." Raina thought about this. "You'd be trying to reform it from the inside. Something like that. That's incredibly dangerous. Everything is dangerous now." She couldn't argue with that logic. What would it mean for us, for Micah? It would mean security. Real security. It would mean no one would ever dare threaten you again. And it would mean you'd be back in a world of violence. I'm already in that world, Raina. The question is whether I'm running from it or controlling it. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Kyung received word that 3 of Daehyun's former lieutenants had been killed overnight, not by rivals, but by their own men. The organization was eating itself alive. "It's chaos," Kyung reported. "No clear leadership, no unified strategy. They're vulnerable." "How long before they stabilize?" Junho asked. "Days, maybe weeks. But when they do, they'll be weaker and more desperate. That makes them more dangerous to civilians." Raina watched Junho process this information, saw the moment when he made his decision. "Set up a meeting," he said quietly. "Junho," Raina started. "With the senior members who are left," he continued. "Tell them I want to discuss terms." "What terms?" Kyung asked. "Succession." The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Detroit. Raina insisted on coming despite Junho's protests. "If you're doing this, I need to understand what we're getting into," she said. "I'm not staying in the dark anymore." So she sat in the car outside the warehouse, Micah safely with a babysitter Kyung trusted, and watched through binoculars as her husband walked into a room full of killers to negotiate for their future. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Junho emerged, his expression was unreadable. "Well?" Raina asked as he got in the car. "They accepted my terms." "Which were?" "I take Daehyun's place, but we restructure everything. No more human trafficking, no more drugs near schools, no more targeting civilians." "And they agreed to that?" "They agreed to try it my way for 6 months. If profits don't suffer, we continue. If they do..." He shrugged. "What happens if they don't like your reforms? Then we'll deal with that when it comes." As they drove back to the safe house, Raina tried to process what their life would look like now. Junho would be a crime boss, but one trying to minimize harm. She would be a crime boss's wife, but one who'd already proven she could handle the violence that came with that territory. "Are you okay with this?" Junho asked, as if reading her thoughts. "I'm okay with us," she said. "Whatever that means." That evening, as they prepared for bed in their temporary refuge, Junho pulled her close. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Something I should have said from the beginning." Raina's heart skipped. "What?" "My real name isn't Junho, it's Junho Park. And I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life." "I love you too, Junho Park," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "All of you, the candy apple vendor and the crime boss and everything in between. Even knowing what I've done, what I might have to do. Especially knowing that." She kissed him softly. "Because now I know you're doing it to protect us." As they held each other in the darkness, Raina thought about how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a struggling single mother buying candy apples from a kind stranger. Now she was the wife of a Korean mafia boss, a woman who'd killed to protect her family, planning a future that would be dangerous but secure. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd chosen, and she was ready to fight for it. The next morning, Jun-ho looked at her over coffee and said the words that would define their new reality. A poor single mother married the candy apple vendor, not knowing he was a disguised Korean mafia boss, but now she knows exactly who she married, and she's staying anyway. Raina smiled. Damn right I am. Years later, Raina stood in the kitchen of their new home, watching through the window as Jun-ho taught Micah, now 16 and taller than both his parents, how to change the oil in his first car. The candy apple cart sat in their garage, a reminder of simpler times and the beginning of their love story. Jun-ho had kept his promise. The organization operated differently now, still illegal, still dangerous, but with boundaries that hadn't existed before. No children were harmed in their territory. No families were destroyed for profit. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Raina had finished nursing school and now ran a clinic in their neighborhood, treating people who couldn't afford traditional health care. Some of her patients were connected to Jun-ho's world, but most were just people who needed help. Mum, Dad says he's taking me to get my license tomorrow, Micah called through the window. Did he now? Raina smiled, remembering the scared little boy who'd hidden behind her legs at the candy apple cart. Jun-ho looked up and caught her watching. Even across the yard she could see the love in his eyes, the same love that had started with candy apples and survived everything that followed. Their life wasn't conventional, but it was theirs. And it was perfect. Thank you for watching until the end. Korean Mafia Lovers has many more intense and passionate stories just waiting for you. Subscribe to our channel and help us continue bringing you these incredible tales of love that will keep your heart racing.